Welcome back to another deep exploration into the world of Stranger Things, where we venture into the shadows of the Upside Down to examine every creature that has crawled, stalked, or terrorized its way through Hawkins, Indiana. Today's journey takes us through Stranger Things All Upside Down creatures ranked by power law, a comprehensive examination of the beings that have made this alternate dimension one of the most terrifying realms in modern television. The Upside Down exists as a dark mirror to our reality, a parallel dimension that appears frozen in time at the moment of its connection to our world on November 6, 1983. When young Eleven accidentally tore open a gateway between worlds during her encounter with the Demogorgon, she unleashed a cascade of horrors that would plague Hawkins for years to come. The creatures we're about to discuss serve a purpose within a vast hive mind, a collective consciousness spanning the entire dimension. Understanding their power means understanding their place in this hierarchy and the threat they pose to reality itself. At the apex of this dark pyramid sits something far more terrifying than any mindless beast. A consciousness that has orchestrated every invasion, every death, every moment of terror. The power rankings we're exploring consider multiple factors: raw physical strength, versatility, intelligence, regenerative capability, and the broader threat each creature poses. A physically weaker creature with the ability to possess humans might rank higher than a stronger but straightforward predator. As the show evolved, so did our understanding of the Upside Down's ecosystem. We learned about life cycles, possession, and the intricate network connecting every living thing in that dimension. By Season 4, we discovered that what we thought was the ultimate threat was actually being manipulated by something far more sinister. A revelation that recontextualizes everything we'd seen before. The timeline matters too. That first Demogorgon in 1983 appears to have operated with autonomy we haven't seen since, though whether this was true independence or simply less direct control remains unclear. By 1984, creatures could be controlled more directly. The summer of 1985 revealed new horrors. Bodies melted and reformed into composite monsters. And in 1986, the true architect of all this suffering revealed himself. Let's begin our descent into the Upside Down, starting with the creatures at the lower end of the power spectrum, and working our way up to the beings that make even the bravest souls tremble. Dart and the Demodogs. Starting at the bottom of our ranking, we find Dart, whose full name D'Artagnan was bestowed upon him by Dustin Henderson. Dart represents both the juvenile stage of a terrifying species and a glimpse into whether these creatures possess the capacity for emotion or loyalty. Dustin discovered Dart in his trash can during October 1984. Initially mistaking the small slug-like creature for an unusual pollywog. At this earliest stage, Dart posed virtually no threat. He was rather endearing, fitting comfortably in Dustin's palm and showing a particular fondness for Three Musketeers candy bars. But Dart didn't stay small for long. The creature grew at an alarming rate, transitioning through a 6-stage life cycle. From slug to pollywog, to what they called a frog-organ, then into the catagorgon stage, where the characteristic petal mouth began to form. The name Demodog applies specifically to the adolescent phase, roughly stage 5. At this size, comparable to a large dog, these creatures become genuinely dangerous. Dart specifically demonstrated abilities common to his species at this stage: 4-legged locomotion allowing impressive speed, the eyeless sensory system that tracked movement and heat, and that psychic connection to the Mind Flayer's hive mind. When Demodogs swarmed Hawkins' laboratory in late October 1984, they operated with frightening efficiency. Yet Dart's story contains a fascinating wrinkle. During the laboratory attack, When Dustin found himself cornered by Demodogs in the underground tunnels, Dart recognised him. The creature that should have torn him apart, according to the hive minds, dictates instead chose to let Dustin pass. This moment of mercy proved to be Dart's last act. Shortly after sparing Dustin, the creature died along with every other Demodog when 11 closed the gate to the Upside Down. The severance of their connection to the hive mind didn't just disable the Demodogs, it killed them instantly. They dropped dead simultaneously, their brief reign of terror ending as abruptly as it had begun. This suggests these creatures can't survive without that psychic link once they've become dependent on it. Dart matters to our understanding of the Upside Down's ecosystem. He demonstrated a rapid growth cycle that allows Demogorgon species to go from harmless slug to deadly predator in days. He showed that even creatures bound to a hive mind might retain some individual identity. In terms of raw power, Dart and Demodogs rank low because they're juveniles, dependent on the hive mind for direction and vulnerable to physical damage. Yet they serve a purpose, fast and mobile, deployed in swarms that overwhelm through numbers. Bob Newby learned how lethal a Demodog pack can be when he sacrificed himself to save Joyce and the others. The Demobats. Moving up our power rankings, we encounter the Demobats, flying predators that made their first appearance during March 1986. These creatures represent a different branch of the Upside Down's evolutionary tree. Where Demogorgons operate as ground-based hunters, Demobats control the airways, filling a predatory niche that makes the dimension sky as dangerous as its surface. Demobats share certain characteristics with their Demogorgon cousins, particularly that distinctive eyeless appearance and the petal mouth arrangement of teeth. But where Demogorgons are built for strength, Demobats evolve for speed and aerial assault. They're roughly the size of large bats, but don't let that modest size fool you. The first recorded encounter occurred when Steve Harrington was dragged through the Watergate portal into the Upside Down. The creatures descended almost immediately, 3 wrapping their tails around his throat while 2 others tore at his sides with their teeth. The coordinated nature demonstrates the same hive mind coordination we've seen with other creatures. Steve survived only because Nancy, Robin, and Eddie intervened. The true horror of Demobats manifested in their role during the final confrontation with Vecna. Eddie Munson drew a massive swarm away from a dimensional gate to prevent them from entering the human world. What followed was a desperate battle, as Eddie and Dustin fought off wave after wave. The Demobats demonstrated frightening persistence, breaking through barricades and ultimately overwhelming Eddie despite his heroic resistance. Eddie's death proved several things about these creatures. First, their power lies primarily in numbers. A single Demobat is easily killed, but hundreds operating under unified direction become a deadly swarm. Second, they're relentless. And third, they can cause severe trauma even with their relatively small size. Like Demodogs, Demobats are bound to the hive mind, controlled by Vecna and the Mind Flayer. When Murray Bauman set fire to Demodogs in the Russian facility in Kamchatka, the hive mind experienced overwhelming feedback. This psychic shockwave caused every Demobat in the Upside Down to simultaneously fall from the sky, dead or dying. The swarm attacking Eddie simply dropped, ending the assault but too late to save him. This reveals something important. They're more like remote-controlled drones, extensions of a greater will. Sever that connection, or overwhelm the network with trauma, and the creatures cease to function. It's a significant weakness, but difficult to exploit when the hive mind is protected deep within the Upside Down. Demobats rank higher than Dart because they're complete creatures rather than developmental stages. They fill a unique tactical role, providing aerial reconnaissance and overwhelming defences through numbers. They can bite through fabric and leather and possess that tail strangle technique, yet they remain relatively low on our power ranking because they require coordination from the hive mind, showing little individual thinking. They're physically fragile, easily killed by fire or blunt force, and they lack supernatural abilities like telekinesis or reality warping. The Flayed occupy a unique position in the hierarchy of upside-down threats. They're not creatures in the traditional sense, but possessed humans, men, women, and children of Hawkins who fell under the Mind Flayer's control during the summer of 1985. This represents a different kind of horror, the insidious corruption of familiar faces. The process of becoming flayed began with exposure to the Mind Flayer's influence, often through contact with possessed rats or contaminated substances. Once infected, victims would begin to change, their behaviour growing erratic as the Mind Flayer established itself within their mind. Physical changes accompanied the mental transformation, possessed individuals becoming colder to the touch as their body temperature dropped significantly. But the true horror wasn't just possession. The Flayed retained enough of their original personality to pass as normal in casual interaction, allowing them to move freely through Hawkins without arousing suspicion. They could speak, reason, and plan, making them far more dangerous than mindless monsters. Billy Hargrove became the most prominent example, serving as a lieutenant for the Mind Flayer's human agents. His possession demonstrated the full horror of what the Mind Flayer could do with a human host. Billy retained his physical abilities, his strength making him formidable. But he also gained predatory cunning that made him exceptionally dangerous. He recruited more Flayed, spreading the infection like a virus. The Flayed followed specific directives that revealed the Mind Flayer's strategy. They consumed chemicals and fertilizers, compounds needed for the Mind Flayer's plan. They gathered at designated locations, demonstrating the hive mind's ability to coordinate activities across multiple possessed individuals, and ultimately they willingly sacrificed themselves, melting down into biomass that will construct new forms for the Mind Flayer. This willing self-destruction represents perhaps the most disturbing aspect. They weren't fighting their possession. Whatever remained of their consciousness was so thoroughly subsumed that resistance was impossible. Watching Billy and dozens of others walk calmly toward their dissolution drives home the absolute nature of the Mind Flayer's control. Individual Flayed ranked relatively low in power. They possessed human-level strength, nothing supernatural. They could be hurt or killed through conventional means. Their power came from numbers, their ability to blend in, and absolute loyalty to their master. However, the threat they represented was substantial precisely because they were human. They could access any location without triggering alarm. A Flayed individual could be your co-worker, your neighbour, your family member. This made them perfect infiltrators. The Flayed also served as building blocks for more powerful entities. When the time came for the Mind Flayer to assume physical form, it literally built bodies from the melted remains of the Flayed, incorporating their biomass into composite creatures far more powerful than the sum of their parts. Billy's final moments suggest that some spark of the original person might have persisted. When he positioned himself between the spider monster and Eleven, taking the fatal strikes meant for her, it appeared he had broken free just long enough to make that sacrifice. Whether this represented true freedom, or simply the Mind Flayer's miscalculation about how strongly Billy's protective feelings toward Max could influence his actions remains open to interpretation. That moment cost Billy his life, as the spider monster impaled him with multiple tentacles, but it demonstrated that the Mind Flayer's control might have limits when confronted with sufficiently powerful emotional connections. The vines and tendrils. The vines and tendrils that permeate the Upside Down represent another category of threat, more environmental hazard than creature, yet possessing enough coordination and apparent sentience to warrant discussion. These root-like structures spread throughout the dimension, pulsing with what seems like dark life, forming a vast network that might be more accurate to call a nervous system than a simple growth. When Hopper and Joyce ventured into the Upside Down to rescue Will in November 1983, they found themselves navigating a world choked with these organic structures. The vines seemed almost decorative at first, but later encounters revealed their true nature. These weren't passive features, but active components of the hive mind's sensory and control network. Touching the vines sent signals through the system. Damaging them triggered responses from other creatures. They were the nerve endings of a vast organism. The true danger became apparent in the subterranean tunnel system beneath Hawkins in October 1984. These tunnels, extensions of the Upside Down's influence into our reality, were completely overgrown with tendrils. They created a labyrinthine maze where the walls themselves were hostile. The vines showed disturbing responsiveness, shifting in ways that suggested purpose rather than random growth. Hopper discovered the vines' vulnerability when he encountered them. Fire affected them dramatically, causing immediate damage and sending waves of pain through the hive mind network. When the group set fire to the hub, the central junction where multiple tunnels met, the conflagration weakened the Mind Flayer's grip on Will, and bought valuable time for 11 to close the gate. The vines also demonstrate concerning capabilities beyond sensory function. In Season 4, when Steve, Nancy and Robin found themselves in Vecna's lair, vines actively attacked them, wrapping around their limbs and restraining them with considerable strength. This wasn't passive entanglement, but deliberate capture. The strength required to hold 3 struggling adults suggests these organic structures possess far more power than their plant-like appearance might suggest. The relationship between the vines and the Mind Flayer appears deeply connected. When Will was possessed in Season 2, his connection to the hive mind meant he could sense when the vines were threatened. He would feel the pain of fire being applied to the tunnel system, demonstrating that the vines weren't separate entities, but extensions of the same consciousness that inhabited his body. This suggests the possibility that if the vines are part of the Mind Flayer, then the entire dimension might function more as a single organism than as a conventional environment, though the full nature of this relationship remains mysterious. The spores that drift through the Upside Down's atmosphere likely originate from these vine structures. These spores can cause illness and damage to human respiratory systems, making even the air hostile to human life. Whether the spores serve additional purposes beyond simple reproduction remains unclear, though some have theorized they could facilitate possession or carry microscopic elements of the hive mind's influence. Ranking the vines proves challenging because they don't fit neatly into our power hierarchy. They're not mobile predators that hunt and kill, yet they're fundamental to the Upside Down's function. They lack individual threat level, but collectively they form a network of staggering scale. They enable the hive mind's control and serve as early warning systems for any intrusion. Perhaps the vine's most unsettling aspect is what they suggest about the Upside Down itself. If these structures extend everywhere, connecting everything, then the dimension might not be a place in the traditional sense, but rather something more akin to the body of something vast and ancient. These remain theories rather than confirmed facts, but the evidence points in troubling directions. The hospital monster and spider monster. Now we reach a truly grotesque level of our power rankings, the composite creatures created from the melted biomass of the flayed. The hospital monster and spider monster represent a horrifying evolution in the Mind Flayer's capabilities, the ability to construct purpose-built bodies from human flesh and bone. The hospital monster made its appearance at Hawkins Memorial Hospital in June 1985. Nancy and Jonathan discovered that one of the flayed had seemingly died, but the body proved far from inactive. The corpse suddenly animated, not as a possessed human, but as something else entirely. A writhing mass of flesh and cartilage that could reshape itself at will. The creature demonstrated frightening fluidity, able to squeeze through gaps that should have been too small, to reform after being damaged, and to pursue targets with single-minded determination. What made the hospital monster particularly terrifying was its alien nature. The Demogorgon looked like a monster, frightening but comprehensible. The hospital monster looked wrong, like someone had taken human body parts and assembled them according to rules from a different reality. Its movement was unsettling, flowing and shifting in ways that defied conventional anatomy. 11 confronted the hospital monster and managed to fight it off through telekinetic force, battering it with hospital equipment. But notably, she couldn't kill it outright. The hospital monster retreated through the sewer system, badly damaged but not destroyed, eventually rejoining the greater mass gathering at the abandoned Brimborn Steel Works. The spider monster represents the full realization of what the hospital monster was meant to become, constructed from the combined biomass of multiple flayed victims, mixed with chemicals they had consumed, and shaped by the Mind Flayer's will. This entity served as a physical avatar for the shadow entity in our dimension. Standing stories tall, sporting multiple tentacular limbs that could smash through concrete and steel, the spider monster brought devastating destructive power to Hawkins. The design clearly reflected the Mind Flayer's preferred form, that massive spider-like silhouette Will had seen looming over Hawkins Middle School. But where the Mind Flayer's main body existed, as particles in the Upside Down, the spider monster was horrifyingly solid. Tons of flesh and bone compressed into a mobile weapon platform. Its tentacles could impale, crush, or sweep aside multiple targets. Its bulk gave it tremendous momentum, crashing through barriers that would stop any conventional creature. The Star Court Mall battle demonstrated the spider monster's full capabilities. It pursued 11 and her friends with terrifying persistence, smashing through the mall's architecture. When Elle tried to use her powers against it, she found this creature far more resistant than previous foes. The sheer mass involved meant moving it required enormous effort, and it possessed the power to fight back, grabbing Elle with a tentacle and attempting to drain or absorb her somehow, an attack that left a piece of itself embedded in her leg and subsequently weakened her powers for months. The spider monster's ultimate defeat came not through direct combat, but through cutting its connection to the hive mind. When Joyce and Hopper shut down the Russian facility's gate beneath Starcourt Mall, severing the link between dimensions, the spider monster simply collapsed. Without that constant flow of energy or control from the Mind Flayer's main body, the composite creature lost cohesion. In ranking terms, the hospital monster and spider monster occupy interesting middle ground. They're far more powerful than simple possessed humans or juvenile creatures. They demonstrated abilities that made them dangerous even to 11. The spider monster in particular showcased strength, durability, and size that put it in league with the most formidable threats Hawkins had faced. Yet these composite creatures also revealed significant limitations. They required vast amounts of raw material to construct. They depended completely on their connection to the Mind Flayer for animation. They were purpose-built weapons, lacking the versatility of naturally occurring creatures. And despite their impressive physical capabilities, they could still be fought by determined opposition with the right tools. The creation of these monsters tells us something crucial about the Mind Flayer's nature and strategy. It's not bound to using only the creatures native to the Upside Down. Given access to materials and time, it can construct custom-built bodies suited for whatever task it needs accomplished. This adaptability suggests an intelligence that thinks in terms of tools and solutions, rather than simply unleashing whatever monsters happen to be available. The Demogorgon. Now we arrive at one of the most iconic creatures in Stranger Things history, the original Demogorgon that terrorized Hawkins in November 1983. This entity set the standard for everything that followed. Its appearance launched the entire conflict, and even after its destruction, it cast a long shadow over subsequent events. The Demogorgon stands roughly 7 to 8 feet tall when fully upright, though it's capable of moving on all fours when increased speed is needed. Its most distinctive feature is the head, or rather, the complete absence of anything resembling a conventional face. Instead, the creature possesses what's been described as a petal-like mouth, a flower bloom of flesh that unfolds to reveal concentric rings of teeth designed for tearing. The creature's body is humanoid in broad structure, but clearly adapted for predation. Long, powerful limbs ending in clawed hands and feet. A muscular frame suggesting tremendous strength backed by inhuman endurance. Skin that appears almost plant-like or fungal. What makes the Demogorgon particularly terrifying is its hunting method. The creature is blind, possessing no visible eyes, yet it tracks prey with disturbing accuracy. Blood draws its attention immediately, the smell of even a small wound sending it into a hunting frenzy. But it also seems to detect movement, body heat, or some other sensory marker that allows it to function perfectly in the Upside Down's darkness. The Demogorgon demonstrated several abilities that set it apart from lesser creatures. First, it could create temporary portals between dimensions, tearing holes in reality that resembled organic wounds. These portals allowed it to appear anywhere in Hawkins without warning, emerging from walls, ceilings or floors to snatch victims. Second, in at least one instance, it appeared to display telekinetic capability when it unlocked the chain on Will Byers' front door without physically touching it, though whether this represents a true psychic ability similar to Eleven's or some other mechanism remains a subject of debate among fans. The creature's hunting pattern showed disturbing intelligence. It didn't just attack randomly, but seemed to target specific individuals. Will Byers was taken alive, rather than killed outright, dragged into the Upside Down for purposes that remain unclear. Barbara Holland was killed, and her body left in a pool in the Upside Down's version of the Harrington house, perhaps serving as an incubator for Demogorgon larvae, though the exact reason for this behaviour is never fully explained. The deer that Nancy and Jonathan found, partially dragged into a portal, suggests the creature may have been taking prey back to the Upside Down rather than consuming them on sight, which could imply the existence of a lair or feeding ground. Eleven's connection to the Demogorgon proved central to understanding both. She first encountered it during a deep psychic scan, her consciousness, touching something monstrous in the void between dimensions. That contact apparently triggered the creature's interest. When Brenner forced her to make contact again, the resulting interaction tore open the Mother Gate, creating a permanent rift between worlds. The final confrontation between Eleven and the Demogorgon at Hawkins Middle School showcased the full extent of both combatants' abilities. The creature moved with blinding speed, shrugging off bullets from soldiers. It demonstrated raw physical power that nothing human could match. But Eleven's telekinesis proved superior, pinning the creature in place before disintegrating it completely. The cost of that victory was Eleven's temporary disappearance. Yet the Demogorgon's destruction in 1983 didn't end the species' presence. Season 2 revealed that Demogorgons have a complex life cycle. The question of why the Demogorgon kept Will Byers alive instead of killing him like it did Barbara Holland has never been fully answered, suggesting there may be purposes to the creature's behaviour we don't yet understand. Season 4 showed us that the Soviets had captured multiple specimens, keeping them imprisoned in facilities beneath Kamchatka. One of these specimens, fully mature, proved just as dangerous as the original. In ranking terms, a mature Demogorgon occupies a high position among upside-down threats. Its physical capabilities exceed human limits by orders of magnitude. Its dimensional portal creation gives it unparalleled mobility. The possible telekinetic abilities make it a psychic threat as well. Its sensory system allows it to hunt effectively in any environment. And its durability means conventional weapons are largely ineffective. What keeps the Demogorgon from ranking higher is primarily its lack of true intelligence and strategic thinking. It operates more as an apex predator than as a thinking opponent. Powerful but predictable. It's bound to the hive mind's control, lacking apparent autonomy. And it's vulnerable to specific methods of attack. Fire causes it significant damage, overwhelming its regenerative abilities when applied with sufficient intensity. The Demogorgon represents a threshold in our rankings. Everything below it on our list can be fought with clever tactics, courage, and adequate preparation. Everything above it requires either supernatural intervention or extraordinary sacrifice to overcome. The Demogorgon sits right on that line, a creature of nightmares that can kill entire groups of armed soldiers but can still be hurt, trapped, or destroyed by sufficiently determined opposition with the right tools. The Mind Flayer. Now we ascend to a different category of threat entirely, beings that transcend the physical limitations of the creatures we've discussed so far. Here we find entities that don't just hunt and kill, but that can corrupt reality itself. The Mind Flayer stands at the intersection of several mysteries that define Stranger Things mythology. Known variously as the Shadow Monster, or simply him by those who've encountered it, this entity represents something far more ancient and incomprehensible than any individual creature. It exists as a massive organism composed of countless silver-black particles, each particle seemingly autonomous, yet bound into a collective consciousness that spans the entire Upside Down. When Will Byers first saw the Mind Flayer in his visions during October 1984, the entity appeared as a towering shadow above Hawkins Middle School, its form vaguely spider-like, with 6 legs reaching down from a central mass. This wasn't metaphor or hallucination. Will was seeing the Mind Flayer's true form within the Upside Down, a being so vast it loomed over the dimensions landscape like a mountain. The entity has been estimated at a minimum of 50 stories tall, though calling it a creature with discrete boundaries might miss the point entirely. The Mind Flayer's capabilities exceed anything we've encountered among lesser creatures. It can possess living beings, taking control of their consciousness and body. This possession operates on a spectrum, from subtle influence to complete subsumation that erases the original personality. Will's possession in Season 2 showed the progression. Initial contact establishing a connection, gradual loss of self, and finally complete control, where Will became little more than a spy for the entity. The hive mind network the Mind Flayer controls represents another form of its power. Every creature in the Upside Down exists as part of this collective. The Mind Flayer can see through their eyes, coordinate their movements, and direct them with perfect precision. When Demodogs attacked Hawkins' laboratory, they operated with military efficiency because they weren't individual animals, but a single distributed intelligence controlling multiple bodies. Weather manipulation represents yet another ability. Throughout Season 2, whenever Will experienced visions of the entity, it was accompanied by massive storm systems wreathed in red lightning. These weren't natural weather patterns, but something the Mind Flayer either generated or was intrinsically connected to. The atmospheric changes in the Upside Down itself could be manifestations of the entity's emotional states or biological processes, if such terms even apply to something so alien. When activity involving the Mind Flayer intensified, storms appeared to rage with greater fury, though whether this represents true emotional response or simply increased energy expenditure remains uncertain. The Mind Flayer also demonstrated the ability to affect Eleven's powers, specifically diminishing or draining them somehow. When the spider monster's tentacle lodged itself in her leg, her telekinetic abilities weakened dramatically. Even months after extracting the fragment, Elle remained powerless, suggesting the Mind Flayer had done something more fundamental than simple physical injury. Creating and reshaping matter appears to be within the Mind Flayer's capabilities as well. It built the spider monster from base materials, melting human bodies, and chemical compounds down to raw components before restructuring them into a form of its own design. This isn't simple puppetry, but biological engineering at a level that suggests the entity possesses deep understanding of matter and life, possibly at a molecular level. Yet, despite these formidable powers, questions remain about the Mind Flayer's true nature and origin. The entity existed in some form before Vecna arrived in the Upside Down in 1979, appearing as a formless cloud of particles in what was then called Dimension X. Vecna claims to have shaped it, giving it the spider-like form we recognise. However, some accounts suggest the particle cloud may have possessed sentience and intelligence even in its original state. One interpretation holds that the Mind Flayer might not be Vecna's creation or tool at all, but rather an ancient force that could have influenced or even created Vecna's powers when he was accidentally transported to Dimension X as a child, though this remains unconfirmed. This ambiguity about the power dynamic between Vecna and the Mind Flayer becomes crucial to understanding the threat hierarchy. If Vecna controls the Mind Flayer completely, then the entity serves as an extension of his will, powerful but subordinate. However, if the Mind Flayer possesses its own agenda and intelligence separate from Vecna, if the relationship is more complex than simple master and servant, then we could be dealing with two apex-level threats working in concert, which would multiply the danger exponentially. The Mind Flayer's weaknesses are as mysterious as its abilities. Closing the gates between dimensions clearly hurts it, severing its ability to manifest in our world and killing any creatures or possessed individuals dependent on the connection. Heat and fire damage both it and the vines and creatures connected to it, suggesting vulnerability to thermal energy. In our ranking, the Mind Flayer occupies the highest tier of power, below the ultimate threat. Its abilities span multiple domains: physical, psychic, dimensional, and reality-altering. It commands entire armies of creatures and possessed individuals. It can adapt its strategy based on observed failures. It's effectively immortal, existing as a distributed consciousness that can't be killed by destroying any individual component. Yet the Mind Flayer still ranks below one final entity, not because it's less powerful in absolute terms, but because that entity controls it. The revelation of Vecna's existence and role as the master of the Upside Down recontextualizes everything the Mind Flayer has done. Every invasion, every possession, every death can be traced back to the will of one individual who transformed into something beyond human comprehension. Vecna, Henry Creel, Number 1. At the peak of our power hierarchy, towering above every creature and entity we've discussed, stands Vecna. Known also as Henry Creel and as Number One, this being represents the ultimate fusion of human psychic ability and the Upside Down's dark power. Vecna is not merely the most powerful creature in the Upside Down, he is its architect, its controller, its consciousness given terrible purpose. The story of Vecna begins not in the Upside Down, but in Hawkins itself, in a house on Moorhead Street where the Creel family moved in 1959. Young Henry Creel possessed abilities that set him apart from humanity, psychic powers that allowed him to reach into minds, manipulate perceptions, and exert control over living things. These abilities didn't come from experimentation like Eleven's, they appeared naturally, though the source remains one of the story's central mysteries. According to one account, Henry gained these abilities after being accidentally transported to Dimension X as a child, which could suggest the Mind Flayer's particles infected or altered him on a fundamental level, though other interpretations exist. Henry's powers grew alongside his disturbing philosophy. He viewed himself as superior to normal humans, seeing their structured lives as a form of prison. He found kinship with Black Widow spiders, creatures he viewed as apex predators, bringing balance through predation. This worldview led him down a dark path, culminating in the murder of his mother and sister on March 25, 1959, using his psychic abilities to torment them before killing them in ways that would later define his signature methods. According to one account, the Mind Flayer may have possessed Henry during this moment, and forced him to commit these murders, though this conflicts with other evidence suggesting Henry acted of his own volition. Victor Creel, Henry's father, survived but took the blame, spending decades institutionalized. Henry fell into a coma from the strain, but survived. Dr. Martin Brenner discovered him, recognized the extraordinary potential, and brought Henry into Hawkins' laboratory. There, he became Subject Number One, the first of what would become a program to create psychic children. For years, Henry served as both subject and assistant in Brenner's program. A device called the soteria, implanted in his neck, suppressed his powers. He worked as an orderly, helping manage the other children, learning from their development and waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity came in the form of 11, a girl whose powers rivaled his own. Henry befriended her, manipulated her into removing the soteria chip, and once free, he unleashed absolute devastation on Hawkins' laboratory. The massacre Henry perpetrated in September 1979 remains one of the most horrific events in the entire series. He killed virtually every child in the program, along with most of the executed staff, using his powers to crush bones and tear apart bodies. Only 11 survived, and only because she managed to resist his attempt to recruit her. In a climactic battle, young Elle tapped into emotional reserves Henry couldn't match, channeling her love for her mother and her rejection of Henry's nihilistic philosophy into raw power that threw him backwards, not just across the room, but across dimensional boundaries. Henry's banishment to what would become known as the Upside Down represents the pivotal moment when the dimension's nature changed. He arrived in a realm that was dark and strange, but not yet the corrupted mirror of Hawkins we now recognize. There, Henry encountered the particle cloud that would become the Mind Flayer. Henry claims he reshaped it, imposing his will upon the formless mass and creating the spider-like entity we know as the Mind Flayer. Whether he truly moulded an inert force to his design, or simply connected with an existing intelligence that allowed him to believe he was in control, remains one of the story's unresolved questions. Either way, this union gave him influence over an entire dimension and its inhabitants. The transformation from Henry Creel to Vecna was gradual and agonizing. The Upside Down's atmosphere slowly warped his body. His skin became burned and scarred, his features distorted, his nose disappearing, his left hand elongating into a claw. Most disturbing, the biological matter of the Upside Down itself began integrating with his body, vines and tendrils growing through him, replacing his original anatomy with something hybrid. He became a living bridge between dimensions. Vecna's powers exceed everything we've seen from other entities. He possesses all the abilities that made Henry Creel dangerous. Psychokinesis strong enough to crush bones. Telepathy that lets him invade minds. Perception manipulation that allows him to create vivid hallucinations. But his time in the Upside Down amplified these abilities beyond human scale. By connecting himself physically to the Dimensions Vine network, plugging into the Upside Down's nervous system through nodes in his back, Vecna becomes immersed in a meditative state that exponentially increases his power. The signature ability that makes Vecna unique is his curse, a psychological assault of such intensity and precision that it defies comprehension. Vecna reaches across dimensions into the minds of victims in Hawkins, identifying targets based on psychological vulnerability, trauma, guilt, shame, or depression. Once he establishes contact, he begins tormenting them with visions drawn from their own memories and fears, forcing them to relive their worst moments repeatedly. This psychological torture weakens their mental defenses. The curse manifests through specific warning signs. Victims begin seeing a grandfather clock, Henry's personal symbol representing his hatred for time and structure, appearing in impossible locations. They experience severe headaches and nosebleeds as the psychic intrusion intensifies. They suffer waking nightmares that blend seamlessly with reality. And finally, when Vecna judges them sufficiently broken, he pulls them fully into his mindscape, a red fogged realm centered around a fractured version of the Creel house. In this mindscape, Vecna confronts his victims directly. He monologues about his philosophy, his hatred for humanity, his plans to reshape the world, and then he kills them, slowly and sadistically, using telekinesis to break every bone in their body while simultaneously crushing their eyes back into their skull. It's torture elevated to a supernatural art form, but the curse serves a greater purpose than simply killing. Each victim's death at Vecna's hands creates a gate between dimensions, a new permanent rift connecting the Upside Down to Hawkins. 4 deaths, 4 gates arranged in a specific pattern, would allow Vecna to tear open a massive portal that would enable full-scale invasion. The victims Vecna chooses demonstrate his intimate knowledge of Hawkins. Chrissy Cunningham, suffering from an eating disorder and emotional abuse. Fred Benson, guilt-ridden over a car accident. Patrick McKinney, traumatized by his abusive father. Max Mayfield, drowning in grief over her brother Billy's death. Each target was carefully selected, identified through Vecna's ability to scan minds across dimensional boundaries. Max's near death at Vecna's hands showcased his full power. Only music, specifically Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, a song tied to happy memories strong enough to pull Max back from the brink, disrupted the curse long enough for her to escape. But Vecna adapted. When he cursed Max again, he was prepared, trapping her in a corrupted version of her own positive memories. The final confrontation revealed abilities we hadn't seen before. He could bind people using the Upside Down's vines. He could manifest physically in memories and visions. He survived coordinated attacks that should have killed any other creature. Nancy shooting him repeatedly, Molotov cocktails setting him ablaze, and he still survived, regenerating from injuries that would have been fatal to Demogorgons. Eleven's psychic battle with Vecna pushed both to their limits. She invaded Max's dying memories from across the country and confronted Vecna in his mindscape. For a time, 11 held her own, but ultimately Vecna proved stronger, capturing both Elle and Max and binding them with vines. What saved them wasn't superior power, but coordinated strategy. While Vecna focused on his mental battle with 11, Steve, Nancy and Robin attacked his physical body in the Upside Down's Creel house. This divided his attention, weakening his grip just enough for Max's friends to reach her with music. The combined assault forced Vecna to retreat, his body falling from the attic window after sustaining massive damage. But here's the terrifying truth. Vecna survived. His body simply disappeared from where it fell. And as Season 4's final scenes revealed, his plan succeeded despite the hero's efforts. Max died, if only for a moment before Elle revived her. That death, however brief, counted. The fourth gate opened. The massive portal Vecna needed tore open through Hawkins, and the Upside Down began spilling into our reality. Vecna's survival and continued threat make him the ultimate power in our ranking. He commands the Mind Flayer, and by extension every creature in the Upside Down. He can kill at a distance, reaching across dimensions to torture and murder. He can create gates between worlds, literally reshaping reality's structure. He possesses both vast psychic power and considerable physical durability. He's intelligent, strategic, patient, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. His weaknesses, such as they are, remain largely mysterious. Dividing his attention between multiple threats reduces his effectiveness. Intense damage to his physical body can force temporary retreat, but none of these weaknesses offer easy solutions. Exploiting them requires coordination, sacrifice, and the kind of power that only 11 possesses. Looking forward to Season 5, Vecna represents an existential threat to Hawkins, and potentially the entire world. With the massive gate now open, and his power undiminished despite his physical injuries, he's positioned to launch the full invasion he's been planning for years. The corruption spreading from that gate transforms Hawkins' landscape into a hybrid of Earth and the Upside Down. Everything we've learned about Vecna suggests he won't stop until he's either defeated completely or has reshaped the world according to his vision. His hatred for humanity, forged in childhood trauma and decades of isolation in an alien dimension, has crystallized into a philosophy that views human extinction as not just acceptable but necessary. He sees himself as apex predator, bringer of balance, the force that will purge the world of what he considers humanity's weakness. Negotiation isn't possible with someone who fundamentally rejects your right to exist, and so we come full circle in our examination of Stranger Things' all Upside Down creatures ranked by power law. We've journeyed from Dart, the small pollywog who spared his friend, through various stages of horror and corruption, to arrive at Vecna, the architect of nightmares who orchestrated everything. The power hierarchy is clear. At the bottom, juvenile or incomplete creatures and possessed humans. In the middle, apex predators and composite monsters. Near the top, the vast intelligence of the Mind Flayer. And at the very peak, controlling everything, the twisted remnant of a boy who gained godlike power and used it to wage war on existence itself. Each creature we've discussed plays its role in this hierarchy. Understanding these creatures and their power levels isn't just academic exercise. Each creature has weaknesses that can be exploited, vulnerabilities that offer hope for victory. But each also possesses capabilities that make them formidable threats requiring respect, preparation, and often sacrifice to overcome. The final season promises to bring all these threads together, to show us the full extent of Vecna's plan and test whether human courage and determination can stand against powers that bend reality itself. We'll see whether 11 can recover her strength and match Vecna in final battle. We'll learn if the bonds of friendship and love that have sustained the heroes through previous crises can endure against odds that seem insurmountable. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the lore and power rankings of Stranger Things' most terrifying entities. If you enjoyed this comprehensive examination, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of your favourite shows and their hidden depths. The Upside Down still holds secrets we haven't uncovered, and as we approach the final season, there's never been a better time to understand exactly what the heroes of Hawkins are up against. Until next time, stay safe, keep your friends close, and remember that in the world of Stranger Things, the real monsters are never quite what they seem, and the most dangerous threats often wear familiar faces.